Welcome to today's session, Planning Effective Coordination to Reduce Rework. We hope you enjoyed the session and that you'll gain a lot of insights in how to reduce your work through the different stages of the building environment. Before we get started, let's do some introductions. Hi, my name is Machiel. I'm the Technical Manager at Modern AEC. I've been in the BIM industry for over 6 years now and actively helping clients adopting software, workflows, and technology for the better part of 5 years. I'm passionate to improve the digital adoption of various tools and expand the capabilities within the AECO industry, and ultimately to automate where I can. As a little bit of a note, I don't typically see myself as an expert, and I guess this is also why we're all here today, is to learn from each other and to expand our own knowledge and capabilities. Now, the company I do work for is Modern AEC, and we've got a clear focus as being one of the largest resellers of Autodesk products in South Africa and in Africa, is really to help the AECO and infrastructure sections to reduce their frustrations with software and technology, ultimately giving them the power to do what they want to do. We are also a smaller part, AEC and infrastructure, of a bigger Moderna design group, where Moderna is really a leading technology consulting firm in South Africa. And we deal with a variety of clients across disciplines ranging from the AEC and infrastructure to manufacturing, mining, multimedia and entertainment. So across the board. Collectively, we've got more than 20 technical staff that have exceptional skills in various industries and backgrounds that really will help drive change for what we do. Now, for this session, we will be looking at some of the best practice on setup and workings of an effective coordination process. You'll be learning what the management side of things are, the technical sides, and how you can apply these principles. Now, if you haven't seen the descriptions of the slide or the general product information, you will be able to see it on the slide and our learning objectives that will help you through the process. Now, before we continue, let's have a little bit of a backdrop to why we're doing this. Now, for me, this workshop came to be as a bigger picture for the Bamarambi. Is also we want to drive smarter buildings and cities, more economical design, smaller footprints. You know, these days you don't need a 25 square meter office space with all the amenities. We'd really want to reduce that element and ultimately adding more technology to what we do. Now, this puts a lot of strain on the design process as we have less space for more services. We've got less time to do more work. And we need to really focus on how we do these items together. So let's start by looking at the processes of making these workflows stick. And how do we get it to become a habit without having to fall down the rabbit hole of rework, which is always a tedious process. As such, I wanted to create a little bit of a theme. Something that Frank Lloyd Wright said was, you can use an eraser on a drafting table or a sledgehammer on the construction site. Now, we all know using an eraser, removing anything in the software is a lot cheaper than trying to remove something while on construction. And that's ultimately where our rework sits, is during the construction process when things don't work anymore as we intended. And that's where we really want to put our focus on, is before we get to construction. How do we make sure that everything we put into the site can actually be there? Now, I've included some random pictures of some of the most unlikeliest coordinations you might have come across. And although these images are ridiculous and quite obvious, this speaks volumes to the kind of challenges we face within our industries during design coordination, cross-discipline communication, and ultimate collaboration with different stakeholders on the project. This is a variety of influences and people having to make decisions without having necessarily all the knowledge or the correct knowledge to make that. Now, I know you guys have all great examples of where coordination could have done better on previous projects, on current projects, and how the impact they had on time and cost and quality. And, if you can, please share them, through the Boomerang community setups to help showcase how you guys are solving these industry challenges. Now, as a starting point, I did want to talk about a little bit of something before we get into actualities, and that's the 3 Cs. These forms the basics of all the disciplines on our everyday interactions. If you're a designer, engineer, a client, a construction team, your involvement on any project typically is being reinforced by these 3 Cs. Now, as we break them down, we do have the 3 major ones. So the first one is collaboration. Now, although we hear the word collaboration a lot, we need to collaborate more and things like that, but what does it really mean? It's ultimately that any professional lead will not start the day without seeking input from other people and openly discuss the needs of a problem. It's really focused around the collaboration of the entirety, not the individuality. Although collaboration isn't easy to start and maintain, it does provide valued information to project and BOM leads on the projects. The construction industries have developed various workflows and processes over the years to improve collaboration workspace and to connect the stakeholders to encourage combined input. This, in more recent years, has translated into near live information being fed back to the correct people in real time and provides a connected BOM experience. Now, the BOM experience is really what you want to get to, that connectedness of getting data as and when it happens, to ultimately collaborate with the information as it's being generated. Now, this really starts forming the part of internal and external. Now, as you navigate into the next C, coordination, this is where you really need to look at how a project lead, like a sport coach, requires someone to unify the teams across the disciplines and all the members within there to create a synergy between the parties. It is this role that ensures a team can identify trends and assemble the finished product as quick as possible with less rework. Now, this is a big task that needs to be happen, and that's why typically your project lead has to be the driving force of getting these people to work together. Good coordination is a critical element when key stakeholders partake. And just emphasis on that, key stakeholders. Everyone, client, developer, contractor, everyone is a stakeholder, and they all should partake in this coordination. And in return, this drives the overall performance and is essential to effective delivery. The coordination is also just the top tip of the 3 Cs, and this is the most influenced by the other 2 Cs. Our first one being coordination, and leading that into our second one as being our communication. Now, this is in part science and art, and this is really the process of transferring information from one person to the next and ensure that that information is received and understood. Now, communication is often taken too lightly. Although we all preach it on a daily basis, and we all considered it as an afterthought that we could have communicated better, and there was communication lacking in all aspects of the project, we don't really take the time to enforce it and create it. Now, typically, bad communication results in the blame game between people and ultimately creates bad blood on projects. And this is what hamper with work. Now, to solve this, project and BOM leads must be able to engage in a language that everyone can understand. And this in turn will reduce the miscommunication and promote an openness to projects. It's so often I just hear language from one consultant being thrown at another consultant, and the words are just missing each other. It's really finding that communication where everyone understands what you're talking about. Now that we have more knowledge on what the 3Cs consist of, and how it can assist us on a project, we can now start looking at some practical ways of implementing strategies that encourages and emphasizes of what we've just learned. The foundation of effectiveness brings processes in place to reduce communication, improve collaboration, to ultimately reduce our rework. And one of those really critical points or starting points is the BIM execution plan. We've heard about this document over the years and people telling us we must have it because blah, 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 blah. So many reasons why we must have it. However, very few really talks about the practicality of it. Why is it a must? What does this document help to solve? How do you do it? Instead of just being a 40-page document of just terminologies and processes and procedures, they don't really break it down to why certain aspects are way more important than others or why you need to focus on areas. In most cases, you get this document, you heard about it on the internet, and you have to do some extensive research to really understand the ins and outs of this document, to see its benefits. And once you've received it, you always have the struggle of then you have to give that information to someone else. You need to let the project adopt it, your company, your colleagues, and that's a different challenge at the end of the day. For me, the critical part of a BIM execution plan is the way we capture the 3Cs within the document, the way we can achieve our goals as a collective, as a project team. It's not about the terms and conditions of a BIM execution plan, the legality of it. It's really a way of putting down on paper or digitally how we want to collaborate on this project. Now, there are some minimums that you need to do for a BIM execution plan to make sure it's successful as a communication tool for projects. Some of the core ones is your information delivery strategy. That sounds simple enough. We'll send the project over to the next guy on day 2 or day 3 or weekly or whatever the case might be. But it's a little bit more than that. So many times I've seen on projects where one company only uses Dropbox, other companies only via WeTransfer links, another company is using SharePoint, and all of them are working on the same project, but we're using different delivery strategies to get the information across. And that's without the client having access to it or have to ask multiple people and getting information from different locations, different people on a constant basis. Just by putting down how, when, and the method we're going to use for this project streamlines a lot of ways of sharing information to keep it as near live as possible. Second one is the federation strategy. Now, everyone kind of goes and just start linking in, XREFing, putting everyone's information in and just work on it. And then when we share the files again, we share work back, we double up of information, and it becomes ineffective. So some guys are using XREFs and using CAD files, other guys are using Revit or Tekla or whatever software. But by putting a little bit of a strategy together to say, how are we going to take all these different project files? How are we combining it? How are we viewing it as a complete project? And just putting that strategy down so everyone understands that the architect models contains X, Y, and Z. They are coming out of this product, and we can use this methodology to bring it in. Other consultants might need to export out to IFC and as a format and bring that in. It really brings a better understanding to how the project needs to be placed together. On top of that is the high-level responsibility matrix. Now, I always despise creating a responsibility matrix because there's so many names, so many required fields, who needs to see what, do what. But at the end of the day, it really brings clarity to what information should go to what people, how should they be seeing it, what roles do they play within it. And because it's a high level item, you're not going down to the nuts and bolts of the elements. You're just looking at which organization, which key personnel within that organization has what responsibilities. Then we run into the proposed additions or amendments to the project information standard. Now, this is kind of a missing key component, because ideally you would like to receive an exchange information requirement from clients. And that is where this process sits, to say what you're proposing to change to what the client might ask. And it doesn't mean that you're right or the client's wrong or vice versa. It just means that for this project, there is a better way of doing it. And it's highlighting that process, highlighting to your company, to the client, to the design team, the contractors, as we suggest this is a better solution to our current approach. And on top of that is a proposed schedule of enabling technologies. Now, we do live in an environment where technology plays a big role in what we do. From our drafting software to our delivery methods to coordination, collaboration, technologies play a role. And each technology has different methods. By capturing that schedule, we can identify key methodologies that we need to apply on a project. Before we even have to start, we would know certain outcomes based on certain technologies. And that, again, links back to our federation strategy, our delivery strategies, and things like that. The last topic, and it's mostly, call it a little bit of a newer one to what to most companies aware of, is the information management role and responsibilities. And this is key personnel placed in key positions that ultimately manages the information transfer. It's not necessarily the guys that are managing the delivery strategies or verifying that the data or assets has been captured or built correctly. It's just guys that really plays a role in understanding how everything should fluctuate, how everything should be placed together, how everything operates, and assist the project with managing those items. And different organizations can have their own information managers in positions, and you can assign different responsibilities to them. Now, ultimately, this is just some of the 6 key points to a BIM execution plan. There's a lot more you can talk about. And one of those topics of a BIM execution plan, and what we'll cover, is the coordination component of actually the model coordination. Now, for me, this is the physical workflows that we need to put in place in our BIM execution plan. What we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, and how we're going to assemble these items. Now, this helps everyone understand what is going to happen in the next few weeks or month or project timelines at what deadline. And so everyone is aware of how they need to set up items. The first thing, and it's very much more of a simple setup, is a color code. This helps the team to be able to view a coordination model and visually understand the elements of the building and the geometry. Having this in place, as I've seen, help non-technical people understand better and quicker the inner workings of the building without having to have extensive software knowledge or expensive tools or advanced degrees in 3D viewing. And it really highlights possible problems that can quickly give you solutions by just visually seeing what has happened on the project. Now, once you've started aligning your colors with your geometry, it helps people to understand the next part of it. And that's really looking at the importance structure. Now, the importance of placement and geometry is really a good starting point for everyone to understand who's taking priority in what areas, in what spaces. Although the general zone, which is more of a traditional method, is less important these days because of the complexities of our systems, it does give a good go-to rule, a rule of thumb of where you can start. And for the most part, the services should run and where you should leave space for other services to operate. Now, as I mentioned, a good place to start. I typically like having these general zones in place. It gives me that 80% of guesswork out the window. Everyone knows where everyone should be as a rule of thumb. Now, when you get a little bit further down the line, a little bit later in your design process, you start realizing the zones just don't cut it anymore. There's areas where ducts need to intersect and go over or under, sprinklers and lighting and electrical items, whatever the case might be. Your zones become congested, and we need to start looking at breaking up a building into system structures or geometry structures. And this ultimately brings our priority structure into place. And the idea behind a priority structure is ultimately who should move first, whose responsibility is going to have a higher priority than the next person or a lower priority. And the idea is this is not a cast in stone situation. It's just to reduce the questions that guys will ask. My pipe is running into the HVAC. Who should move? Well, what type of pipe is it? Is it a pressurized system or is it just a normal gravity system? If it's a pressurized system, then the likelihood of me having to adjust for that is very high. Can I do it? If I can, great. I'll just adjust my HVAC. If it's a lower system, I can connect with that designer and say, listen, gravity system needs to adjust for my HVAC system because of X or Y. Now, again, we all understand that this is not a clear cut. This won't happen on every item. Sometimes you will sit in a position where the HVAC just can't budge. The gravity system, there's no more room. There's nothing we can do about it. And we then take those items into a BIM coordination meeting and discuss it with the rest of the consultants of how can we solve this problem. Now, effectively, following this process already, you've reduced 60% of your questions by just analyzing these two items, where you can quickly make decisions on a draftsman level or the design level as to what needs to change. Now, when clashes do become more specifically, we need to escalate that. Now, I typically like to break my clashes up into 3 major areas. And this is when you start looking at what am I clashing into. Now, the 3 items is 1, do a clash, an internal clash, my own responsibility items. As a structural engineer, do I need to run a clash between my columns and beams, between concrete and steel? Where are we hitting problems? There's so often I see files being shared with other consultants. A majority of the clashes belongs to one group of people, and it's because I haven't reviewed their own project files. And nothing wrong with it. We understand more people on projects, more information into files, segregated files, different Revit project files, or whatever the case might be. But doing those internal clashes just alleviates a lot of the possible items coming through. The second one is, although it's still more of an internal item, you then do the clashes against the external files. So as an architect, I will run all my clashes against the engineers, see what's happening on structural, see what's happening on electrical or piping, mechanical, whatever the case might be. At that point, I can take an internal decision of, should I move or will someone else move? If someone else is going to move, then I can pin it for the coordination meeting, or I can quickly just ad hoc call up the guy and say, listen, Mr. Wet Services, please, can you adjust your pipes? This is what's going to happen. This is our problem. Alleviating a lot of that remedial coordination meetings that we have to endure. And only at the last stage, only at the step 3, we do external coordination meetings. And that's really starting to look at the items that can't be resolved through the 2 previous steps or communication with other consultants. This is the items where we need to sit in a room and discuss the solution, bring it all together, find out a problem, resolve it, and then take it effectively back to the designers to draw up and model up. So that really sums up the clashing methodology. And for me, this is where you start saving a lot of time. We've got the priority structures, we've got the colors, we've got more people viewing the files, understanding what's happening and potential clashes. And we're doing more clashes, but smaller clashes. We're not running the whole building, we're isolating it to critical areas. Now, how do you define those critical areas? How do you know where to start? This is where good practice is really to start looking at lean planning for your projects. Now, this is a topic on its own and can be really extensive. And multiple research studies will motivate why these principles are important. So we'll just look at some of the basic concepts that we can use. So lean planning is built in such scenarios to identify the critical path of what needs to be done, by whom and by when. With everybody involved in this upfront session of planning and strategizing, it alleviates a lot of problems that comes out later. It gives trackability to the next steps and highlights the required next actions that need to be taken. Like BIM, taking a bit of time up front saves a lot of time later. Planning now makes your actionable items later so much quicker. Less questions, less items to look at. Now, how do you do it? So one of the items of the planning is to put a track progress of elements in place. Now, the simple enough, it can become quite a complex process. So let's start off with the logic of it. You'll highlight the critical items, critical tasks, critical geometry. You put them into a place, call it the backlog, and from there you start putting in, what are we doing today? What are we going to do tomorrow? What is in progress? What has been completed? What information are we waiting for? Maybe you need information from the mechanical engineers before you can complete your piping layouts. But highlighting these tasks, putting them in place, identifying in which stage they are to track the progress helps a lot with communicating across teams, across project stakeholders, what needs to be done, what is critical on our path. And then on top of that, and a little bit before that actually, you do want to put in milestones and geometry required. I did want to highlight the tracking first because it talks about the little bit of element geometry to it. But before that, before you can really identify what elements need to go where, you want to put in project milestones. When do we need to complete what part of our project? How often do we need to share models? Who's involved in those processes? Is it everyone on the team or is it only selected consultants? At what stage are we on this project? In design phase, we mostly have the architects and maybe civil and the client. The decision making is very small and around specific points. But as we progress more to detailed design and construction phases, we've got more people involved in the process. Now, as we progress, our model information becomes more complex, more geometries being added, finer detail is loaded into the models. And this will help us put our tracking in place against these milestones. So I know from day one, I'm not going to worry about all the piping systems because that's just halfway through the project. But what I need to know now is where my sanitary fittings will sit, where my HVAC units will sit within the ceiling, my lights, cable runs, major elements. And that allows us to define our project information more without having to look at everything everywhere. Now, one of the last topics, and to me, a critical one, something that's been understated for years, is the honesty. Honesty on projects can be broken up into two items, capability and capacity. And I'm keeping it simple, and you can keep it really simple in breaking this information down. Capability looks at what skills, experiences, and knowledge you have in-house and rate it for the requirements of the project. If you have what you need for the project, great, nothing to it, carry on working. If you don't, be honest with yourself. Get someone to help. Ask the other consultants if they can assist. Outsource the works to organizations out there that really focus on those components. Really expand your capability if it needs to. You don't always have to have everything in-house, but be honest about the capability of your internal staff. Second item is capacity. Now, this one is a lot easier to comply to because it's more of a head count. Do I have enough people to do the work at various stages to complete all the tasks? And most companies are quite familiar with being able to identify that we need more heads. We're going to need more people being able to complete this work. And again, just being honest, it's like we don't have, let's bring someone else on to the project for limited duration or whatever the case might be. For me, the honesty, if you can apply this from day one, it will save so much time going forward, especially around the capabilities. With so many software products, technology, methodology, workflows out there, it's really difficult to have 1, 2, or 3 people in-house having this expertise of everything. Now, taking some of the theory out of place, we can now start at applying the practicality of it. Now, we'll take some of the theories and start putting it in place. But as you can see, some of the theories is already in actuality, and it's just about implementing it, making it available, communicating it, collaborating with other people about it. So when we start looking at applying the practicality or the practical to these items, it's really more of a little bit of technical skills you can use to take forward, to take to your next project, you use in your current project, or understanding that you might need someone to complete your capability matrix or increase your capacity of what you can offer in-house. One of the first items is defining the needs. Now, we saw the responsibility matrix or heard about it. We saw about the task management, the element and milestone configurations. And this is just putting it kind of together in a way that's understandable for everyone to see. Now, the methodology or how you apply this is first you identify your milestones. You put them as your headers. In this case, we've got structural, estimate, MEP coordination, asset handover as like milestones. Naturally, projects has a lot more. We'll specify the geometry to the tasks we need to complete for those milestones and to what kind of model level do we need it. Are we just working with placeholder families, or are we going into high detail items with hangers and nuts and bolts and plates and things like that? Once we've got those two systems, milestones and geometry in place, we can assign the responsibility to the companies or the people that will be completing those tasks. Now, for me, a good example is always how you start assigning responsibility and how a responsibility changes from one milestone to the next. Initially, the architect has the biggest responsibility. Design the building, place the initial column layouts, sanitary fixtures, whatever the case might do. They do a lot of high-level layouts within concept design and feasibility stages. Once we hit a certain milestone and we start getting more consultants, your structural engineer, all of a sudden the structural engineer's responsibility is those columns, is the floors, is the structural walls. And that the responsibility shifts then from the architects to the engineers. And this is something a matrix, responsibility matrix, will highlight those items. Who's responsible for what at this stage? And the matrix should be run often and being updated as soon as possible. Now, this is really the foundation to streamline the process. If you can create a matrix that you can quickly refer to and understand what's happening and who the responsibility belongs to, you already solve a lot of rework on project, a lot of miscommunication along the way. Now, some of the more technical items is setting up our grouping of information. So in this example, we're just looking at walls. And we're going to build a rule system no matter where the file is coming from. If the category of the element is called walls, as I'm selecting now the category, and I can say it equals to, so more of a defined item and is assigned to walls, it will select all my walls within the project, irregardless of where it sits, in what files it's sitting, if it's structural or architectural, it will select the walls. And I can save that as referred to as search set. So no matter if I get any updated models with any new information, with new walls, modified walls, deleted walls, that search set will always update based on that information. You can also export this out and import a complete set, which allows you to really reduce your rework, not on one project, but on multiple projects. If you can standardize the way you're doing these things, it really saves a lot of time. And if one consultant is doing all of their items, it could be shared, and it should be shared across the entire project team. Now, once we've identified all of these sets, these grouping of information, we can now start using them in our next stage, color coding. Now, the appearance profile allows us to select these search sets and assign colors to them. So I've got all my walls, or I can look at my roofs, whatever the case might be. Selected, I can change the color, white, gray, black, whatever has been defined in our BIM execution plan, give it a transparency, and update or add to our items. Now, once we've added it, we can just hit update our project, and now all our walls will be color coded as such. Again, we're looking at reducing rework. So we want to be able to use templates from different projects, from different consultants, and just basically effectively load them all into one and running them to change our project. If it's being a new project, an existing project down the line, we want to be able to reuse our information along the way. Now, the last part is really around the coordination itself. So once you've got your building in place, you can effectively create a new test, and we can see all the geometry clashing now visually. And we can select create a new one, so arc versus structure. In short, you can select the models. If you know your 3D models have been set up correctly, we can just use them as such. If not, we can now use our grouping of information. So I can go and say my certs for selection A and selection B, and now I can identify what belongs to the architect, what belongs to the engineer, and run clashes across those. Once I've set it up, I can define what kind of tests I want to run and ultimately run it. Now this will highlight now all of a sudden all my clashes within a project quite quickly without me having to really look into it and trying to visually see it. And from here, we can decide if it's new, if it's existing, if it's a problem or not. Again, using templates, we can build in a variety of other clashes into our system and just kind of update from there where it needs to be. And that's effectively how you can use clashes and reuse that information in a long way to reduce the work we've done. Now, I've just covered the basics of some of what you can do for coordination. There's a lot of other tools that you can use to run coordination, from on-site delivery and installation, which is ultimately animating what you need to do. We can do clashes for existing versus new structures to make sure that where we need to we're not actually creating problems. We can look at construction equipment and timing for the timing of movement for items like cranes or trucks, accessibility to certain areas of the site to avoid any on-site rework. So even taking your coordination from pre-design to construction and alleviating a lot of that even before you get to it. And some of the newer kind of coordination styles that are coming up is the VR and AR coordination meetings. So you can actually walk through the model with key stakeholders, expecting, feeling, getting a real feel for it, especially within VR, seeing if they can actually access the mechanical equipment in a tight space. And you can really start expanding on that. Now, I do recommend go explore the software, go look at what's out there to see what you can bring to the table that's beyond the basics of what I'm showing today. So in summary, I do want to leave some like 4 thoughts here. The 3 C's are critical, and really focusing on them and trying to highlight them throughout your project is going to change a lot to the way you're doing it. Building a usable and easily accessible BIM execution plan with a common language will make the process easier. People will understand it, be able to use it, and effectively take it forward to the next project or to the next person down the line. Setting up coordination models and standards will streamline your productions and resolutions of information. Now, I can't iterate this enough, and I think I've spent the whole presentation of just talking about these coordination processes to be put in place. And the last one, communication. Throughout the process is always important. Communicate where you can and need to. Don't keep something back. I hope you guys enjoy this session. I do want to thank you all for taking the time to come watch my session, the workshop. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any kind of questions or comments. Please, and thank you to Bumarambi Africa for hosting the event. I really enjoyed doing these kind of sessions. Have a great day. Thanks.